Exactly at 3:45 a.m. on October 17, 2025, a powerful explosion shattered the stillness of the Caribbean. About 160 kilometers north of the Venezuelan coast, a U.S. airstrike hit a semi-submersible vessel suspected of transporting drugs. In a matter of seconds, the ocean was lit up by fire and metal. Of its 4 crew members, 2 died instantly. The other 2 were rescued hours later by a U.S. military helicopter. Today, these survivors are being held aboard a U.S. warship, possibly as the first prisoners of war in a new phase of the conflict between the United States and Venezuela. The attack occurred at 3:45 a.m. on Thursday, October 17, 2025, in a disputed maritime zone of the Caribbean, north of Venezuelan territory. It was carried out by United States military forces as part of their recent operation against narco-terrorism, announced by President Donald Trump. The target was a semi-submersible vessel, a type of camouflaged boat that navigates just below the surface to avoid radar. The U.S. government described it as a submarine designed to transport enormous quantities of drugs. The operation, which lasted less than 20 minutes, was tracked in real time from a command center in the Atlantic, while a U.S. destroyer maintained a support position. According to 3 sources cited by Reuters, the strike order was issued after confirming movements of the semi-submersible within an area controlled by the 2nd Marine Expeditionary Force, based in Camp Lejeune, North Carolina. At 3:32 a.m., a reconnaissance drone located the vessel. 8 minutes later, an air-to-surface missile impacted directly on the structure. The attack was so precise that the semi-submersible barely had time to maneuver. 2 of the crew members died instantly, while 2 others, severely wounded, managed to stay afloat until the arrival of a UH-60 Black Hawk rescue helicopter dispatched from the nearest destroyer. The rescue took place around 4:10 a.m., and the survivors were transferred aboard a U.S. warship, whose name has not been officially disclosed. This attack marks a turning point in the military escalation in the Caribbean. Just 1 day before, Trump had authorized covert CIA operations inside Venezuela, generating immediate diplomatic tensions. Furthermore, the Pentagon informed Congress that the United States is formally involved in a non-international armed conflict. Up to that point, U.S. anti-drug operations had resulted in 27 confirmed deaths, but no known survivors. This new incident changes that pattern. The presence of guided missile destroyers, F-35 fighters, and a nuclear submarine in the region confirms an unprecedented military mobilization. Meanwhile, the Pentagon reorganized its chain of command, sidelining Southern Command and granting leadership of the operations to the 2nd Marine Expeditionary Force. Details about the 2 survivors remain a mystery. Neither their identities nor their nationality has been revealed, nor is it known whether they will receive prisoner of war status or be treated as common criminals. However, military sources insist that this rescue was not a humanitarian act, but a strategic move within a war that, so far, the world has not fully recognized as such. When the UH-60 Black Hawk touched the surface of the Caribbean Sea, the wreckage of the semi-submersible vessel was still burning. The rescue coordinates were registered at 4:09 a.m., about 160 kilometers north of the Paraguana Peninsula, Venezuela. The extraction operation lasted barely 10 minutes, executed under controlled fire to prevent further detonations. The 2 survivors, unconscious and with severe burns, were hoisted using metal harnesses. The helicopter pilot, following direct orders from the command center, flew for 35 minutes until reaching the destroyer, USS Preble, DDG-88, one of the escort ships of the U.S. fleet deployed in the region. There, a military medical team was waiting on deck. The initial medical report indicated blast injuries, dehydration, and prolonged exposure to fuel, in addition to unstable blood pressure. Sources close to the Pentagon confirmed to Reuters that the prisoners remain isolated in a security section of the USS Preble, guarded by Marine Corps personnel. No access has been allowed to the Red Cross or international observers. Naval security protocol establishes a 72-hour confinement, while the legal status of the detainees is determined. Preliminary interrogations began 3 hours after the rescue, at 7:30 a.m., with the participation of analysts from the Atlantic Special Operations Command. It is suspected that one of the men might be of Venezuelan nationality and the other Colombian, although the Pentagon has not confirmed or denied this information. Material recovered from the wreckage, including a navigation module, a satellite transmitter, and a watertight container with white powder, was transferred to the Naval Laboratory in Key West, Florida for chemical analysis. The operation is part of the Iron Tide campaign, launched by Washington as part of its offensive against what it calls a narco-terrorism network sponsored by the Nicolas Maduro regime. This strategy, approved by Trump in April 2025, involves the coordinated use of air, naval, and intelligence assets without direct oversight from the U.S. Congress. However, the existence of survivors captured in combat raises a legal dilemma. If the prisoners are considered irregular combatants, the United States would be obliged to recognize a situation of international armed conflict, which would activate the norms of the Geneva Convention. Conversely, if they are treated as criminals, they could be tried under federal drug trafficking laws, without the rights afforded to prisoners of war. Professor Richard Garland, an expert in international law at Georgetown University, stated that this situation could become a legal precedent of enormous repercussion, as it would mark the first time the United States has captured survivors in a direct armed operation against targets linked to Venezuela. At 9 a.m. on October 17, 2025, just 5 hours after the attack on the semi-submersible vessel, the Pentagon confirmed the deployment of military reinforcements in the Caribbean. The operation, classified as Iron Tide Phase 2, mobilized a flotilla of 3 Arleigh Burke-class destroyers, a nuclear attack submarine, and 2 squadrons of F-35 Lightning II fighters. The Operations Center was established aboard the USS Bataan L HD-5, an amphibious assault ship capable of housing more than 2,000 Marines and combat helicopters. The declared objective was to ensure maritime security and neutralize narco-terrorist threats, although the scale of the operation far exceeded a typical anti-drug mission. The movements were monitored by satellite from the North American Aerospace Defense Command, NORAD, and by the Venezuelan Air Force, which denounced the violation of its airspace on 2 occasions that same day, at 11:14 a.m. and 3:47 p.m. Meanwhile, aboard the USS Preble, the atmosphere was tense. The survivors continued under medical observation with armed surveillance. At 9:30 p.m., the ship's captain informed Central Command that the prisoners had been stabilized and that one of them had briefly regained consciousness. During that short window, the individual, according to anonymous sources, reportedly confirmed that the vessel had sailed from the eastern coast of Venezuela and was carrying a cargo destined for Trinidad and Tobago. U.S. investigators consider that this could be a key logistical route within the Eastern Caribbean Maritime Corridor. With the Caribbean skies monitored and the waters crowded with warships, the October 17th incident no longer seems isolated, but the start of a new stage of open confrontation. The capture of 2 men in the middle of the ocean might seem a minor episode, but its consequences are reshaping the geopolitical board of Latin America. In the early morning of October 18, 2025, the USS Preble received new orders. At 2:10 a.m., the ship changed course toward the northwest, destined for Guantanamo Naval Base, Cuba, according to 2 military sources. There, the 2 survivors of the semi-submersible attack would be handed over to the Joint Detention and Intelligence Operations Command, a unit responsible for interrogations in conflict contexts. The transfer was kept secret for more than 36 hours and only became public when a civilian drone captured images of the destroyer sailing escorted by the USS Gravely and the USS Lassen. The Pentagon has not officially acknowledged the whereabouts of the detainees, but leaked documents indicate that they could be the first individuals classified under the status of narco-terrorist combatants, a legal category not contemplated by international conventions. Back in the United States, the government faced growing political pressure. Several Democratic senators questioned the legality of the use of force without congressional approval. Senator Patrick Leahy, in a special hearing, stated, "If there are prisoners of war, there is war. And if there is war, Congress has not been consulted." Meanwhile, the Department of Defense maintained its position. The operations are part of a limited campaign against transnational criminal organizations, not a formal armed conflict. In Latin America, reactions multiplied. Colombia and Brazil expressed support for Washington, while Mexico, Bolivia, and Argentina called for an immediate cessation of hostilities. In the Caribbean, several governments denounced the presence of U.S. warships near their territorial waters. Analysts agree that this incident has redefined hemispheric security. For the first time since the Cold War, the Caribbean has become an arena of sustained military tension between powers. Satellite reports indicate that at least 6 U.S. warships continue to operate between Puerto Rico and the Lesser Antilles, in coordination with maritime patrol aircraft. Just days after the initial attack, the line separating the war on drugs from an international military conflict has become blurred. The 2 men rescued from the sea, still nameless, without a country and without trial, have become symbols of a new phase of global tension, where diplomacy and force no longer seem to have clear limits. The story of the Caribbean semi-submersible does not end in the waters where it was sunk. It is perhaps the first chapter of a broader confrontation, in which the oceans cease to be a border and transform into a silent battlefield. Before you go, we want to know your opinion. Do you believe this operation marks the beginning of a new conflict in the Caribbean? Or was it simply a specific action against drug trafficking? Leave it in the comments and tell us how you interpret this episode. Your point of view can open the debate about where the line between security and war ends.